Hi, everyone.
Wow. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. We have the pleasure of actually having just a fun chat up on stage and having all of you look at us. So if it starts to get too kooky or too quirky, you can just throw something at us and we'll take it well, I promise. But very nice to see you all. Daniel, lovely to be here with you and to meet a fellow climate enthusiast. I thought it'd be lovely to actually hear your origin story first. I know you've have lots of thoughts about this space and you've seen this space in climate sort of evolve over the years. Would love to hear your origin story. When did you get started?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I actually started in the oil and gas industry, the dark side, about 20 years ago. But then within that kind of migrated towards the clean energy and clean tech, that was called then. And it was the big wave around 15 years ago. So a lot of things we're seeing now actually started happening then, but obviously in a much less focused way and fewer people involved. So since then, I've been in that space as an investor, as a co-entrepreneur, and most recently now I sort of work in ADB Ventures, setting up that, which sits at the interface between climate and development, and really looking at how we can invest in solutions that have significant climate impact, particularly for the emerging markets. So it's been a long journey. The big interesting thing is that, particularly now where COP is going on in Egypt, all of a sudden the action is taking place elsewhere, right? All this government talks, it kind of feels like it's a bit gone. Like it feels like per se, like real action is happening in a room like this. And that's a big, big difference from, say, 10, 15 years ago, that we now have private sector entrepreneurs really driving the agenda and governments catching up. So yeah, quite different. But tell me, I mean, your story I think is much more interesting to me, seeing it inside as a female tech entrepreneur and now a climate tech entrepreneur. Would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think my story is a little bit different from yours, at least the way into climate, right? I've been someone who's been in tech for, I don't know, over 2 decades, and has always been in tech, has been, on the B2B side, on the B2C side of tech. But for me, I think the journey into sustainability and climate was very personal. And about a few years ago, there are 2 things that happened. One is, Greta Thunberg was marching and all the girls were marching around the world. And I had my daughter, who was about 8 years old at that time, come to me and say, I feel so restricted. I can't march here in Singapore without permission and things like that. And I don't feel like I'm doing anything to protect the planet. And I won't be able to have the way of life we have now. And she was so affected by it that I almost felt the motherly need to solve a problem. I felt like I needed to give her a tool to control something in her life. And so we started growing a lot of plants and started giving it away in the community. And we put a little social hashtag to it, and we called it Share the Green. And the hope was that that moment will spark inspiration for people to do more around environmental cause. But what that moment, while it started like that, started a cascade, a domino effect for me in my life on thinking about how to create impact at scale. Somehow giving away 100 plants a quarter didn't seem enough after a point, and you're like, man, the problem's looming. And so the next thing for me was to become an angel investor and start to invest in sustainability tech companies. A lot of my board work started to focus a bit more on sustainability, and the only thing I had to give at the end of all that was my day job. And I used to be at Twitter until a year ago, and then at some point I said, this is the time. I need to either step into solving a climate problem or not, which brought me to the venture that I run now, which is called as Terrascope. And essentially it's a platform to help large corporates and enterprises in the private space to go and take responsibility for their own carbon footprint, for their own actions, and to decarbonize their supply chains, right? So that's my story. It's entirely started from a personal point and now I've given everything I had to give in my life to it now, or so it feels at least.
So what was it different now, coming from the traditional tech into climate tech? What do you see as the big differences, with that experience?
It's a good question. I think the purpose anchor as a bridge between good technology and good need for sustainability is very, very strong, and it attracts tremendously high quality talent to this business, right? For people to have a choice between, I can do tech for tech, like Nicole said in the last session, or I can do tech for good. and still not have to trade off profit and get paid a salary and get compensated well. I think that's been the interesting opportunity. The challenge, though, is, in my mind, we don't have enough people who come from the crossroads of these two worlds. So the knowledge of sustainability sits in one type of talent pool, and the knowledge of technology sits in another type of talent pool. So in a way, we're trying to build a bridge between these worlds. At least that's what I see. I don't know what you see from your vantage point as an investor.
No, absolutely. And I think another big difference now, climate tech have been, in it for a long time. I would say it attracted some really good entrepreneurs in the past, but the caliber we're seeing of entrepreneurs now, I mean, the best people coming in from the tech industry into climate space now, like yourself and elsewhere, that's a new kind of event. So all of a sudden, climate tech and is attracting some of the best people out there, but also the best investors and the best support. So it's a really good time, and it's very, very different. Even in the pitch, and I have a broken finger here, or a torn tendon, and it happened actually I was watching the pitches for the global final, and somehow I got so excited I broke my finger. But the quality of those pitches, and many were climate focused, was extraordinary. And it's just different level of people coming in. We're seeing top entrepreneurs, it's not both women and men, but we're seeing women as well. And climate is a space where you need to be resilient. And it's going to take time. You need to be resourceful. It's still an area where people don't fully understand. So being able to stay the course and have that belief system is essential. So we're seeing that, and it's always awkward as a guy sit here and talk about gender issues, right? And can always look from my own perspective. But we do see, I think, there's a difference, right, in terms of some of the female entrepreneurs joining the space, the resilience, the directness, straight to the point, which as an investor is really appreciated. And I think over the next 12 months, as some of this froth in the market is sort of coming down, that will be even more valuable. So for everyone out there in the climate tech space, just stay the course, and I know the market is going to be reward everyone else has been doing this for so many years.
Do you see, and I certainly see that when I look at founders in this space or even CEOs in this space, there's a much larger innate proportion of women coming into this world versus the world I came from, which was pure tech, right? And I have, anecdotally attributed it to this desire to seek purpose and the balance between purpose and profit. Do you see that when you see so many pitches as a VC? Do you see that? Do you see the tie to purpose, or is it just the skill set being more attuned to women?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, and I should maybe answer the question on the purpose. But we do see, I think, women coming in, part because in STEM, the different disciplines of science technology, of course, there are proportionally more women in, for example, biotech. And biotech and life sciences will be a critical part. I don't know if Crosslinker is here. It's one of the company we backed. But, we're seeing, and we saw Mimicry yesterday. I mean, we're seeing women coming out from STEM subjects areas where they dominated, now taking that into climate tech. So it's about a skill set, but it's maybe also, you need to be a bit more resilient, maybe a bit more collaborative. Many more partnerships required in climate than other tech, particularly since it's generally B2B and B2G. So yeah, I think it's a combination. But it'd be interesting, so as you transition now to operate as a female CEO in the climate tech space, is it different? Do you need a different skill set? And how does it work with interacting with investors and also the incumbents and the old sector?
I think it is the difference that I have perceived is the pace, the expectation of pace of change in this space, right? On one hand, things feel like they're going rapidly in climate. On the other hand, you don't get the dopamine hit of impact so quickly as you do in regular tech, because you see that the journey of decarbonization, for instance, as an example, is like a multi-year journey, or you develop alternative protein. It takes a fair amount of time in R&D on this one, or battery tech. And so I think there is that sort of duality that I certainly experience, saying there's a lot going on, there's a lot coming at us in this space, and a lot of speed and innovation needed. But at the same time, to see the impact, it needs patience. It needs a bit, it's not the dopamine hit you expect to sort of say, I launch an app and I see a massive surge in audience, etc. So it's a slightly different pacing. But I think there is in terms of the talent and being able to pull the same talent, I think we face the same challenges. I have to look at my leadership team all the time and say, do I have a gender balance? Am I bringing the right kind of people? I still need an engineering and a data science team, and my gender diversity is not something I can take for granted in that space. So there are lots of things that are quite similar to tech in terms of running a traditional tech business versus a climate tech business too.
That's good. And another change we're seeing is, I think, overall the venture capital landscape around the world, still too few women as GPs, and senior partners in particular. Long way to go, but it's a lot better. And I see actually in Asia now, some of the key funds here are now bringing in female partners at quite senior level. And I think that's going to change a lot, right? I mean, it's going to be good for the LPs, good for investors, but also good for the entrepreneurs. And you know, investors like myself, we talk a lot of nonsense, right? And we pretend to know, but in the end, it is the entrepreneur that really knows the market and knows what's done. And the truth is, for climate, a lot of the market are actually women, right? Both in terms of mitigation, you know, how do we reduce CO2 emissions? A lot of this reduction is going to be done in industries like, you know, textile industry, in agriculture and so on, where women will play a key role adopting the new solutions. And the other part is around what we call resilience. So how do we make the world, the communities, more resilient to the impact of climate change? Now, I think it's well known in this room in particular that women face a disproportionate negative impact of climate change. You know, 80% of displacement for climate change relates to women. Women have to look after the health, the children and the aging population that are more exposed to the risk of climate change, and all these things. So women's going to be a key part of the market for climate change solutions. Therefore, having someone can understand that market, leading a company, is essential from an investor's point of view, right? So I would really encourage all the entrepreneurs here to, you know, in the climate space, to really say, look, we understand the market. This is a huge market that is untapped for climate solutions that are targeted towards women, both on the mitigation and adaptation side. And that's still very, very early days. And do push back on investors when they say, oh, we know. You know, like myself, been 15, 20 years in this space, you know, I've seen it all. I really haven't, right? I will say I've seen it all, but I haven't. So really, push back. But actually, I would like to hear about because you work in the agricultural sector, which is one of the most complex and hardest sectors to deal with.
Yeah, I think the Terrascope journey has been very interesting, biased by our first sort of corporate investor, which was Olam, which is a agri and food commodities business. We have biased in sectoral expertise in agri and food, and then sort of diversified to other places. And you realize that there are two interesting things. One is that these companies in the agri and food sector have been focused on sustainability for a lot longer. They have a slightly more mature point of view. The chief sustainability officers in general, to your point about, you know, women being part of the solution and being part of the recipients of the solution, the chief sustainability officers who we work with are predominantly women. It so turns out, right? And so there is, and then who they are serving as well in terms of smallhold farmers or other things are all very tied to women. And so I think this whole development angle is certainly very predominant and interesting. And when we go to other sectors, you take the retail or the FMCG sectors, and there you see a pronouncedly different sort of way of working. But I think it would be amazing to sort of hear, you know, your own investment philosophy, if you will, as you look at startups, as you look at investments in the climate space. What's the investment philosophy? How do you marry the return side of investment philosophy to the development side of investment philosophy? You're one of those unique, you're in that unique vantage point to look at both quite actively.
I mean, our thesis is quite simple. If we want to have a real big impact, it also has to be commercially very scalable. So we don't necessarily see a trade-off between development impact and scalability and financial upside. In fact, we see them go hand in hand. You need to have both. And looking at Asia, I mean, I still feel no one's going to pay for a climate benefit. It has to offer something else, right? It has to be a better product, a cheaper product, more reliable, something else. And then you get some climate benefit. I still think that's the only way to scale. The good thing, there are so many solutions out there that can offer both, right? There's no reason now to think of climate as being a trade-off. The question is really how we get those solutions more efficiently to the market. So we look a lot of those things that have this solving a regional problem, because we think most of these problems are similar across. There are obviously variation, but similar, and can be scaled up. But it might take a little bit longer than usual, but upside might actually, the returns in the long term might actually be greater. So yeah, we don't see necessarily that trade-off. What we do see is that there is a pool of technologies out there that are really, really good, really good payback. I have, for Asia, my rule of thumb, unless it's less than 3 years payback, it won't cut it. I mean, that goes for anything, right? No one thinks 6, 7 years in Asia, emerging Asia, right? No one's going to put solar and saying, oh, I get a 7, 8 years payback. It just doesn't happen. I mean, I don't do it. No one else does it, right? People look 2, 3 year payback. But the good thing, there are things that are getting into that now, where things like you can almost instant payback, like some of the digital solution for energy efficiency, or electric vehicles, so on, that might have 2, 3 year payback. There's enough stuff out there, but it has to get to the right user in the right way at the right time with the right financing, and that's still a big challenge.
You brought up COP this year, and one of the relatively sobering pieces of news that came in right before COP is that we almost certainly are set to miss this 1.5 degree target, right, of the planet sort of warming. And as I stepped into the climate world, I ended up studying a lot of the science and the climate science behind it. And sometimes it's very sobering to see what the implications could look like. And really, when I started to think about technology solutions, really in my mind there are two types of solutions for anybody that's looking at getting into this space or looking at what problems to solve. One has very clearly on the digital data and digital technology side. This is about options like solutions like Terrascope, but several others in terms of really making the world more connected with data, finding solutions using data in a more intelligent fashion. But this does not solve the climate problem in itself. There's a very important other side of tech, which is a little bit more scientific, which is what I call hard tech, or some people call clean tech, which is really battery technology, renewable energy, and thinking about other spaces like that, or even whether it's alternative protein, etc. And to me, the innovation in both these worlds has to accelerate parallelly, and we can't do one without the other. So when we look at, from a Terrascope lens, when we look at an industry or a sector and we say, what will it take to get to net zero? We think roughly about 25 to 30% of the emissions are directly sort of controllable by the company, whether it's renewable energy or other things. You can start to do things that are relatively easy to do without CapEx investment to start to decarbonize. Then another 30% is roughly, or another third is roughly requires CapEx, but is in your control to do. And then the final 30%, nobody has solutions to today, right? Which is where we're waiting on sustainable aviation fuel or battery technology. And so there's a very interesting blend of science and technology that's come in, which is, I think, a really nice new avenue of looking at technology in a much broader lens in some ways. I'd love to hear your views on where you see more of the innovation in these buckets.
I mean, I think, of course, what you're doing, I mean, I think that digitization of the economy, but particularly on the climate sector too, like Terrascope. I don't know if everyone's familiar exactly what Terrascope's doing, but essentially they're mapping the whole agriculture industry and where the CO2 is at. I mean, you can, but I think those kind of those kind of data around understanding where the problems really are. And you can call it the roadmap for all of this stuff, for these actions you need to take. You do need hard tech at some point to take actions. But one, you need to be able to know where you need to take action. You need to be able to quantify the impact of action, both financially and climate-wise. And right now, we don't have enough data to be able to efficiently either figure out where to do it or to show the real impact financially. And without that, we can't even do the financing either. So I really see that interaction of the digital world with hard tech and financing, that nexus, finance, hard tech, and digital, is where a lot of it will happen. And that's what I think where Terrascope, and would love to hear more about it, is so essential to getting stuff done.
Yeah, I think the finance world is a very, very key accelerant almost to action in this space. And really, if I have to strip down Terrascope as a technology for y'all, it is a end-to-end decarbonization SaaS platform, and really meant for companies, large enterprises with supply chains. If you start with the end in mind, you know how companies are actually doing reporting every year to sort of say, here's my ESG report, and here are my carbon emissions, and here are the things that I'm doing to start to mitigate some of these emissions, and I'm going to get to net zero by so and so year. This is the output of the journey that we expect companies will be on, and Terrascope uses data science to take a lot of data from inside the company to say, where are your emission hotspots? What is very often, like in many other parts of technology, the 80-20 rule applies. 20% of actions or activity inside your company often contribute to 80% of emissions that you have, right? And so when you then start to match up what you're doing to reduce emissions, if they don't tackle these hotspots of the 20% that are driving the 80% of emissions, it looks like you're greenwashing, right? Because you're really taking things that are not material and you're talking about it. And so it's really trying to tune Terrascope is a platform that we use to tune boards, CEOs, management, sustainability teams to really think in sync about where to prioritize next best action and how will you actually get to net zero. It's a scary thing sometimes to take on a goal without knowing today how you'll decarbonize that last chunk or third of your emissions, right? But that's really what all the companies are having to do. And you start to see need for resilience, and you talked about resilience. In some ways, you may declare your emissions as a first time, but you may realize over time that you measured something incorrectly or you have more information and you have to go and change your starting position. And these are all things I think as a community we should be absolutely okay to do and not necessarily worry about saving face and restating these things. And all of this is happening partially because technology is evolving at the same time, where we're sort of living with a little bit of ambiguity and unknown, right? And we're sort of moving. We can't wait. We can't say that we'll wait till certain technologies are ready before we start actioning some of this. So it's a very interesting time, and Terrascope is one of, a slew of different solutions in the world that we're trying to build to enable that path to decarbonization.
Yeah, and we need hundreds of Terrascopes. Of course, there will only be one Terrascope, but will be hundreds of solutions out there. I mean, very quick, how many people here are in climate space? I'm just curious. Or it's quite a few. First of all, I think there are probably more than you think, because climate space is really a wide definition. So a lot of people are understanding. Probably a lot of people do things here that might not even think of themselves climate, which is totally fine, but actually have a significant climate impact. So there's one thing. Don't exclude yourself from this climate economy. You might actually be part of it. The other thing I would like to there's a massive clock here ticking. We invested, we only been up and running for 2 years now. We invested around 35, 40 companies. Around 80% is climate focused. But we'd love to invest many more, and particularly with female founders. And really that's from a pure investment point of view. I think there are so many solutions out there that would need female founders to push. But unfortunately, there's only be, say, 3-4 of those, or maybe 20% would has female founding teams. I would love to meet more. If you know someone or come up to me, please, please just come up and discuss. And what we also done is that we pulled together other investors in Southeast Asia and Asia overall, from Korea, China, and create a little coalition of climate investor so we can share deal flow more easily between 6-7 of us investors. And I think together we're managing maybe $500 million of VC money. So even if ADB Ventures might not be, there should be investors out there. We just need to see how we can match better. And I think it's just such enormous potential. And the last word, how do we get more Terrascopes in the next 5 years?
I think we need a lot more. So we need the people who raise their hands in this room to multiply massively. To be honest, the thing that keeps me up at night is how are we going to actually, how is the world going to go through this transition to avoid disasters like, you know, islands like Singapore getting swallowed with sea levels rising, right? And I'm being dramatic here, but there's a lot more we need, and this is the perfect kind of room to be able to say, how do we build these solutions?
Yeah.
But thank you so much for being here, Daniel. And
No, thank you. It's fun.
I appreciate the other side of this conversation from the finance point of view very much.
So thank you, everyone. And please, let's have coffee and let's talk, whoever wants to. Thank you. And
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.